Hi, I'm Elisia Howard, and I am the founder and CEO of College Insight. And the most common question I get from just the general public, whether I'm at a speaking event or I'm with colleagues, is how did you get into this? It's such a unique field. And that's actually a very long story, but I am going to keep it as short as possible here. I had a single mom growing up. My dad left when I was 1. And, nobody in my family had gone to college. My mom is one of 9. I have 30 cousins or something. And even out of all of us, only 4 of us went to get a 4-year degree. I'm the only one in my family with a graduate degree. And so needless to say, I didn't have a whole lot of help when it came to education. And it wasn't for lack of support. My mom and my family was very supportive of me pursuing my education goals, and I've always been very ambitious. But you don't know what you don't know. And honestly, I work with a lot of clients and who both parents have went to school, even graduate school. And, that was 30 years ago for them. The system has changed a lot, and they can't help their children either. So I was always really smart. I was always really ambitious. And, I knew I wanted to do something really great with my life. I didn't know what that was at the time. But I just listened to my teachers, and my teachers said and what society says. You go to school, you work hard, you get great grades, you go to college, you graduate, and you're going to make all this money, and you're going to be successful, and don't worry about it. Take out the student loans. Everybody does it. You're going to be making so much money. You don't have to worry about it. Well, I did that. I went to college when I was 16. I finished undergrad when I was 21. I went to graduate school 2 weeks later when I was 22. I was 21 when I went to grad school. I was 22 when I graduated from grad school, which is going to give away my age, but that was in 2008. And they do not tell you growing up that you might graduate during one of the worst recessions in history. And here I was, I'd worked so hard to get where I was, and there were no jobs. There was nothing. And because my family, we didn't have any resources, we had, no money, I had to work my butt off just to get to where I got. I had to go watch a lot of my friends who I tutored through college, got all these great jobs, and because their families had resources and I didn't. So I basically worked really hard, and I just said, I'm going to take the first job that's offered to me. So I took it, and I commuted 2 hours each way to get to that job, making $14 an hour, and using none of the skills I had really acquired in college. But I mean, that's how it was back then. I'm sure many of you have, similar stories to that. So I said, I was going to go back to law school, and I said, let me just let me take a step back. A lot of my friends had come out with no debt. Not all of them had wealthy families. I had heard of people going to grad school with no debt. So certainly there must be a way to do this. And one thing, if you haven't heard from my story, is that I am very resourceful, and I am an outstanding researcher. If there is information to be found, I will find it. And so I said, let me go to law school, but let me do it the right way this time. And that means I'm not spending $1 for it, and I'm going to get into a high-level law school because I'm going to figure out how to do that. I hated my job at the time. It was a great company to work for, but it just wasn't my thing. So at the time, I wanted to go to Europe because my roommates in college were from Europe, and I love Europe, and I really wanted to travel, and I figured my career's not going anywhere, the economy's crappy, I might as well travel and get experience, learn languages, that'll look great on my law school application, and then I'll come back and go to law school. Well, it turns out it's very, very hard to get a visa in Europe for obvious reasons. So I had a best friend from college at the time who had lived in Korea, and she said, hey, you should come here. And I fought her on that for a whole year. Finally, I got desperate enough, and I said, fine. And the Korean government had invited me over in a special program to teach there, in a special government program that they run because of the qualifications that I had. So I packed my bags, and I moved to Korea and I didn't know a single word. I didn't know how to read Korean. I thought I knew how to use chopsticks, but I was quickly told when I got there that I didn't. And I took a shot in the dark. I figured if you're going to be miserable, you might as well be miserable in another country and travel, right? So I did that. Turns out I was pretty good at that because I won all kinds of awards. Ended up getting a job as a university professor in Seoul, and ended up teaching at actually one of the top engineering schools in Seoul for the rest of my time there. I was there for 6 years total in Korea. And while I was in Seoul, I had all these student loans, and, I'm a saver, and I said, I'm going to save my money, I'm going to pay off debt. And so I also worked part-time for a company which basically you do the training for their executives. When somebody in Korea was going to go abroad to live in a Western country or English-speaking country, they needed training on that. And so I was the trainer. So I trained all kinds of executives from, Microsoft and Honeywell, and I was the in-house trainer for New Era. So I worked in a lot of corporate education as well when I was also working at the university. So I did that, and by this point, I was, working, I worked in admissions. I had all these students from all around the world. I was working with these executives. I just saw it all. And I met some mentors there that had worked in, college applications for years. These are big-time, well-known people within education. And they kind of took me under their wing, and I kind of started helping them, and I ended up getting pretty good at this admissions thing. And so one day, I was having dinner with a mentor of mine, and he said, "Elisia, why don't you do this professionally?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Admissions and career counseling and college counseling, you should do that professionally." Well, I'd been doing it as a hobby at this point. I'd been doing it for years as a hobby. In Korea, expats are very tight-knit, so I had a lot of, friends and people I was helping. Their students had been at international schools for years. Now they're going back to the U.S. to study there. I had, Koreans and other foreigners that study in Korea who were going abroad to various Western countries all over the world to study. I lived across the street from the main military base in Korea, so I had a huge network of friends that were in the military, and I started helping them, use their GI benefits appropriately, or they had children who, were at the American schools on base there. All these kind of unique situations that I just kind of navigated and knew how to do. And I was getting really interested in finance. I just felt like the student loan bubble was the worst thing that could have happened to our country, because so many of my friends, weren't able to pay their bills on an entry-level salary. They had worked really hard, and we did everything that, our parents and our teachers told us to do. We did the right thing, and it didn't really work out very well for us. And so by this point, I had kind of figured the system out, and I just didn't know people paid for those kind of services, because to me, who doesn't know how to get into Harvard, and who doesn't know how to get into the Air Force Academy, and who doesn't know how to get into the University of Washington? It was common sense to me. I'd done it for a while. So I'd done some research on it, and after about a year, or 2 years into my university tenure, I got promoted to assistant professor. And that is when I was 26 at the time, and I really had this awakening of, as much as I loved my job and I traveled extensively and I had 16 weeks of paid vacation and I only worked 3 or 4 days a week, I'd worked too hard for my career. I couldn't max out at 26. So I really put some serious thought into it, and eventually, got my ducks in a row and quit my job and came back to Seattle to start College Insight, with the big reason being, I taught Korea. I've had thousands of students, but I felt like every year I really, really got through, because yes, I love teaching and I'm a great teacher, but there's a lot of great teachers. So I felt like I really, really impacted, on a deeper level about, 10 or so students a year, which most people would be happy with. How many people over their lifetime would think, 50, 60 people would be an amazing impact on the world. But for me, it wasn't enough. I said, I want to help thousands of people because I didn't want, I'm an older millennial. I didn't want the younger millennials and, my children's generation to have the same problems that I had. I'm watching a lot of my friends, they either have to get married at the courthouse, or they can't buy a home, or they can buy a home or get married, but only one or the other. Or, a lot of them waited a long time to have children because they couldn't afford it, because their student loans were such a burden, or because, they needed to go back to graduate school to pursue their career. But financially, it just wasn't, it wasn't a good fit. So I wanted to make sure that generations coming up were well supported in that, and they weren't coming out with loads of debt, and that, they were going to a school that was a really good fit for them, because it ends up costing money and time if you're transferring schools, if you're changing majors. This all adds up. So I just felt like, I didn't have the right support, but I can be there to help support other students. And that I can maybe use my wisdom and my story to help others. So that's how I got here. And if you're interested in working with us, go ahead and contact us, and I'll be happy to see how I can help you.